Welcome to today's story time. This story is called The White Snake and is a Grimm's fairy tale reimagined. A long time ago, there lived a queen who was famed for her wisdom through all the land. Nothing was hidden from her, and it seemed as if news of the most secret things was brought to her through the air. But she had a strange custom. Every day after dinner, when the table was cleared and no one else was present, a trusty servant had to bring her one more dish. It was covered, however, and even the servant did not know what was in it. Neither did anyone know, for the queen never took off the cover to eat of it until she was quite alone. This had gone on for a long time, when one day the servant, who took away the dish, was overcome with such curiosity that they could not help carrying the dish into their room. When they had carefully locked the door, they lifted up the cover and saw a white snake lying on the dish. But when they saw it, they could not deny themselves the pleasure of tasting it. So they cut off a little bit and put it into their mouth. No sooner had it touched their tongue than they heard a strange whispering of little voices outside the window. They went and listened, and then noticed that it was the sparrows who were chattering together and telling one another of all kinds of things which they had seen in the fields and woods. Eating the snake had given them power of understanding the language of animals. Now it so happened that on this very day the queen lost her most beautiful ring, and suspicion of having stolen it fell upon this trusty servant, who was allowed to go everywhere. The queen ordered the servant to be brought before her, and threatened them with angry words, that unless they could, before the morrow, point out the thief, they themselves should be looked upon as guilty and put to death. In vain the servant declared their innocence, but to no avail, for they did not have an answer as to where the ring had gone. In the servant's trouble and fear, they went down into the courtyard and took thought how to help themselves out of this trouble. Now some geese were sitting together quietly by a brook and taking their rest, and whilst they were making their feathers smooth with their bills, they were having a confidential conversation together. The servant stood by and listened. They were telling one another of all the places where they had been waddling about all the morning, and what good food they had found. And one said in a pitiful tone, "Something lies heavy on my stomach. As I was eating in haste, I swallowed a ring which lay under the queen's window." The servant at once seized her by the neck, carried her to the kitchen, and said to the cook, "Here is a fine goose. Pray kill it." "Yes," said the cook, and weighed her in his hand. "She has spared no trouble to fatten herself, and has been waiting to be roasted long enough." So he prepared the bird, and as it was being dressed for the spit, the queen's ring was found inside the goose. The servant could now easily prove their innocence, and the queen, to make amends for the wrong, allowed them to ask a favor and promised them the best place in the court that they could wish for. The servant refused everything and only asked for a horse and some money for traveling, as they had a mind to see the world and go about a little. When the servant's request was granted, they set out on their way, and one day came to a pond where they saw 3 fishes caught in the reeds and gasping for water. Now, though it is said that fishes are not very intelligent, the youth heard them lamenting that they must perish so miserably, and as the young person had a kind heart, they got off their horse and put the 3 prisoners back into the water. The fish leapt with delight, put out their heads and cried, "We will remember you and repay you for saving us." The youth rode on, and after a while it seemed that they heard a voice in the sand under their feet. They listened and heard an ant-king complain, "Why cannot folks with their clumsy beasts keep off our bodies? That stupid horse with his heavy hoofs has been treading down my people without mercy." So the young adventurer turned onto a side path, and the ant-king cried out as they passed by, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." The path led into a wood, and there the youth saw 2 old ravens standing on the edge of a nest, and throwing out their young ones. "Out with you, you idle, good-for-nothing creatures," cried the ravens. "We cannot find food for you any longer. You are big enough and can provide for yourselves." The poor young ravens lay upon the ground after falling from the nest, flapping their wings and crying, "Oh, what helpless chicks we are! We must care for ourselves, and yet we cannot fly. What can we do but lie here and starve?" So the good young person alighted and killed their own horse with their sword, and gave it to the starvelings for food. Then the starvelings came hopping up to it, satisfied their hunger, and cried, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." And now the youth had to use their own legs, and when they had walked a long way, came to a large city. There was a great noise and crowd in the streets, and a man rode up on horseback, crying aloud, "The king's son wants to find their life partner, but whoever seeks his hand must perform a hard task. And if they do not succeed, they will forfeit their life." Many had already made the attempt, but in vain. Nevertheless, when the youth saw the king's son, they were so overcome by his great beauty that they forgot all danger, went before the king, and declared themselves a suitor. So they were led out to the sea, and a gold ring was thrown into it before their eyes. Then the king ordered the youth to fetch this ring up from the bottom of the sea, and added, "If you come up again without it, you will be thrown in again and again until you perish amid the waves." All the people grieved for the handsome youth. Then they went away, leaving them all alone by the sea. The youth stood on the shore and considered what they should do, when suddenly 3 fish came swimming towards him, and it was the very fish whose lives the kind servant had saved. The one in the middle held a mussel in its mouth, which it laid on the shore at the youth's feet. And when they had taken it up and opened it, there lay the gold ring in the shell. Full of joy, the youth took it to the king, and expected that he would grant them the promised reward. But when the proud prince perceived that the youth was not his equal in birth, he scorned them, and required them first to perform another task. He went down into the garden, and strewed with his own hands 10 sacks full of millet seed on the grass. Then he said, "Tomorrow morning, before sunrise, these must be picked up, and not a single grain be wanting." The youth sat down in the garden and considered how it might be possible to perform this task, but they could think of nothing, and there they sat sorrowfully awaiting the break of day, when they should be led to death. But as soon as the first rays of the sun shone into the garden, they saw all the 10 sacks standing side by side quite full, and not a single grain was missing. The ant-king had come in the night, with thousands and thousands of ants, and the grateful creatures had by great industry picked up all the millet seed, and gathered them into the sacks. Presently the king's son himself came down into the garden, wearing a royal gown and crown upon his head, and was amazed to see that the youth had done the task they had been given. But he could not yet conquer his proud heart, and said, "Although you have performed both the tasks, you shall not be my partner, until you have brought me an apple from the tree of life." The youth did not know where the tree of life stood, but set out immediately, and would have gone on forever, as long as their legs would carry them, though they had no hope of finding it. After they had wandered through 3 kingdoms, they came one evening to a wood and lay down under a tree to sleep. But soon they heard a rustling in the branches, and a golden apple fell into their hand. At the same time, 3 ravens flew down to the youth, perched themselves upon their knee, and said, "We are the 3 young ravens whom you saved from starving. When we had grown big and heard that you were seeking the golden apple, we flew over the sea to the end of the world, where the tree of life stands, and have brought you the apple." The youth, full of joy, set out homewards, and took the golden apple to the king's beautiful son, who had now no more excuses left to make. They cut the apple of life in 2 and ate it together, and then the prince's heart became full of love for the youth, and they lived in undisturbed happiness to a great age. Snip, snap, snapped. Now this tale's told out.